Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today we're going to be going through my top 24 fantasy football wide receivers for NFL Week 2 action. These are players that after watching Week 1, we've moved them around, we've reassessed how we think about various defenses, how we think that certain game situations impact various players on this list. So we should have a pretty good idea of how things are going to be playing out this week and good expectations for how to assess these players heading into their respective matchups. So if you're new around here to the SFS channel, drop down and subscribe. Leave a like on today's video so we can also help our content reach other fantasy players looking for help in their leagues. But without further ado, let's hit that intro and get straight in to our first player. One more thing I want to touch on here before we get into Davante Adams, my number one wide receiver for Week 2 action, is that if you would like access to SFS's entire positional rankings list for every single week of fantasy action, head down and click the link to sizzlefantasy.com/SFS Gold, which is our exclusive membership package here on the channel. That'll get you access to my individual quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and defensive rankings for each and every single week here this season for just over $1 a week in addition to exclusive membership privileges on our SFS community Discord server, which can also be found in the description of today's video. So a lot of stuff to take advantage of. It's just over $1 a week to take advantage of those opportunities. With that being said, Davante Adams, my wide receiver one for this week. The Packers were a meltdown. I get it. Last week was ugly. Davante underproduced. It didn't quite look that great, but we did get one really nice pass from Aaron Rodgers to Davante. Dropped right in the breadbasket. That connection, we saw flashes of it in Week 1. It'll get back on track here. The Packers were an utter meltdown, but they will take steps forward, getting back to where they should be. The Lions are maybe the easiest matchup for any team as well in terms of the passing game here for Week 2. Jeff Okudah, the number one corner, is out for the season with an Achilles injury. That means that Davante Adams gets to work against corners who are not even close to the talent level and the skill level that he's at right now. So if Aaron Rodgers can just throw the ball on a fade route, Davante Adams should be able to have a monster week. I mean, literally, he is so far and away better than the next best corner on this Lions roster. It should be an absolute massacre out there, and he should be putting up points left and right the entire game long on Monday Night Football. So if you're a team that finds yourself with Davante Adams needing like 25 points next week, I am not saying that it's a shoo-in that he's going to get those numbers, but I would feel pretty dang good about your chances of reaching a crazy high ceiling this week, given the matchup and given the caliber of a player that's going to be faced up against players who are not on the same level as him this week. Davante should be in for a huge performance. Very similarly, DeAndre Hopkins, I had him as my number 2 wide receiver last week again. So Davante and DeAndre, the number 1 and 2s for back-to-back weeks now. He went off against the Titans, and I think he can do the same thing here against the Vikings in Week 2. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins both had very, very successful games in Week 1 against this matchup. Hopkins is a mile above each of those players at this point in time. Heading into Week 2 against the Vikings now, he should find some very good success. Him and Kyler Murray are one of the best quarterback-wide receiver combos in the National Football League right now. And if Hopkins can ultimately get his target share that he sees on a week-to-week basis, there's nothing to worry about. Great ceiling and floor for him this week. At the number 3 spot, I've got Tyreek Hill playing Baltimore. Now, we all saw what he did last week. I had him at my number 3 spot a week ago as well, and obviously he outproduced Davante Adams, who was at the top of the list, and even DeAndre Hopkins at the number 2 spot. But when you talk about having a 75-yard touchdown and nearly 200 yards of total receiving offense, that's just the threat that Tyreek Hill poses on a given week. Now, the Ravens do have Marlon Humphrey and some very formidable corners, but they've also lost some guys there as well to injury, including Marcus Peters and Jimmy Smith earlier on in the offseason. So if he finds himself getting away from Marlon Humphrey, there's certainly an opportunity for him to have some more huge plays, and just because he's Tyreek Hill, he has the chance to do that regardless. But this week, I think the number 3 spot is a lot more realistic than it was even a week ago. But nonetheless, that ceiling is always sky high. Tyreek Hill can absolutely blow the top off of defenses regardless of who's matched up against him. DK Metcalf against Tennessee. this should be one of the highest ceiling potential performances for Metcalf of the season. The Titans have one of the worst back ends in the National Football League, and you talk about a deep threat in DK Metcalf who can go up there and catch a contested pass against anybody. He should put up great numbers. And Tyler Lockett, you'll see similarly, is reflected on this list as having a very high ceiling in his own right. But we saw Hopkins, what he did last week against the Titans. Now it's time for DK to step up. He'll have his big game here. Stefon Diggs looking for a rebound performance against the Dolphins here in week 2. He struggled against Pittsburgh in week 1, but that was more of a product of Josh Allen just having no time to pass the ball because he had dudes lighting him up and in his face within a couple counts of catching the snap. So if he can just get more time in the pocket, Diggs will have the chance to stretch the field and make those big plays down the sideline or whatever the case may be here. This is one of the best quarterback and wide receiver combos in terms of a dude who can just run past defenders and a quarterback who has a rocket for an arm and can just chuck it downfield. It's almost Mahomes and Tyreek Hill-esque, but I wouldn't say Diggs has quite the top-end speed of a Tyreek Hill, obviously. Nonetheless, these two have the utmost potential of ceiling for fantasy this season. Diggs should bounce back. I see these corners in Miami as more ball hawk threats in terms of they go out there and make plays on the ball to take it away from an offense, and less so shut down defenders that will completely axe a player's fantasy outing out of the game. So basically what I'm saying here, Xavier Howard is not something I'm afraid of this week. He might pick off Josh Allen, but I don't necessarily think that he's going to clamp up Stefon Diggs and prevent him from scoring fantasy points. Justin Jefferson against the Arizona Cardinals. This is something I thought would be a little bit more exploited by the Titans passing game last week, but because Chandler Jones got in Ryan Tannehill's lap so fast, he didn't have the time to pass the ball deep downfield and to attack this Cardinals secondary. Hopefully Kirk's offensive line, which hasn't been all that elite in the past couple seasons, steps up here and produces or performs more up to standard per se than that Titans offensive line. Taylor Lewan got smoked for 5 sacks from Chandler Jones last week. So Minnesota's got their hands full here. But if Justin Jefferson can come out and catch passes close to the line of scrimmage and do his work after the catch, I expect that to be something factored into the Vikings offensive game plan here this week. The Titans are a deeper passing threat. They want to run play action off the run game with Derrick Henry and shoot the ball downfield with A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. Jefferson and Thielen at least present the opportunity to run plays in between the hashes and to run crossers across the middle of the field and hopefully pick up run after catch that way. If Jefferson's able to be utilized in that role, I think he'll come out here and have a very high ceiling. But if not, we could see the Vikings offensive line struggle to hold up similar to the way the Titans did last week, and in that case, their production might drop a little bit. Calvin Ridley against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here. Look, Tampa's going to score their points. Atlanta, can you match it this time? Last week, the answer was no against Philadelphia, but Calvin Ridley should have all the opportunity in the world to see volume come his way. It's just going to be a matter of if the Atlanta Falcons offensive line can hold up in pass protection against that Buccaneers front seven and give him the time he needs to get the ball to Ridley. Keenan Allen against Dallas here is my number 8 player. Look at all the wide receivers, all the tight ends, everyone that produced for Tampa against this Cowboys defense last week. They're still them boys. They're going to let you have your way in the passing game. Mike Evans was the only guy that was quiet last week. And Keenan Allen should come out here being the target volume monster for this Chargers offense and Justin Herbert's favorite threat. He's going to have his numbers. He's going to have his way. He always has a great floor. The ceiling should be elevated an extra notch this week. This could be one of Keenan Allen's best performances of the season. A.J. Brown at the number 9 spot playing Seattle. If the Titans want to stay in the game this week, they're going to have to find an effective passing game. It starts with A.J. Brown. Obviously, you need to set up the play-action game with Derrick Henry running the football. But if you can do that, A.J. will come out here. He'll get his numbers. And I think that if you're going to have to try and keep up with Russell Wilson, A.J. Brown's the top threat to do so because Julio looks like he's still trying to either get himself acclimated to this new team, shake the cobwebs off, whatever the case may be. He did not look like Julio Jones in week 1. Ceedee Lamb at number 10 against the Chargers. The Cowboys just need to pass the football. This is probably the highest volume passing offense in the league with Dak Prescott under center. If you've seen that stat that came out over the last week or so, the Cowboys haven't won a game in like 3 years without scoring 30-plus points. That means you got to pass. You're playing an elite quarterback in Justin Herbert, or at least an ascending quarterback with elite potential in Justin Herbert. That means you're going to have to score points, keep up with the game. I think Ceedee sees the most targets this week. He was only out-targeted by 1 in favor of Amari Cooper last week. I think that swings back in Lamb's favor this week and ultimately propels him over the top of him. Tyler Lockett against Tennessee, I mentioned. DK Metcalf has an elite ceiling this week. So does Tyler Lockett. I was lower on both of these players in week 1 because the Colts matchup they were facing tends to limit big plays given up to the opposing team. It literally didn't matter. These guys are so good that Lockett found his way past the safeties and got deep twice and scored. And DK Metcalf scored a touchdown on his own as well. So both of these players are so good at what they do. You give them a matchup this good, they are going to feast. Now, maybe the Titans back up and play cloud cover 3 defense the entire game and let the Seahawks pound them with Chris Carson all day long. But if that's not the case, and if Chris Carson continues to do his job, they're going to have to come up, stop the run, and when that happens, boom. There we go. Boom. Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, over the top to the house. It should be a massive, productive weekend for one of or both of those options. Amari Cooper just behind Ceedee Lamb here. Both of these guys are fantastic lineup options this week. The Chargers are no joke of a defensive unit, but they're also not something that is intimidating to me from a fantasy perspective. Cooper's going to get his looks. He's going to get his numbers. And at the end of the day, his run after catch, his ability to win deep balls, that gives him a great week-to-week ceiling that I like to see, especially here early on in the year. Chris Godwin at the number 13 spot, starting out my number 2 wide receiver territory versus Atlanta. Let's be honest. If the Bucs didn't have Rob Gronkowski, Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin, they would be the number 1 and 2 option, which has been in the past. Obviously, Evans and Godwin would be higher up here. But since there's so much diluted target share because they have to distribute and feed a lot of mouths there, Godwin falls down the list a little bit here. Him and Tom Brady have been on point so far this preseason, and in week 1 they were fantastic as well. Godwin lost a fumble at the end of the game. Hopefully that doesn't impact the targets he sees this week. But against a Falcons matchup, he should easily produce against one of the league's worst secondaries. Allen Robinson playing Cincinnati this week. Same situation as last week when I looked at Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. This Bengals defense has a lot of number 2 corners on it. They're just not good enough to hang with number 1 wide receivers. That's what Allen Robinson is. If he's able to produce, if he's able to have Andy Dalton protected and get him the football in an efficient manner, A-Rob will go back to having those very consistent numbers we've seen in the last 2 seasons there in 2019 and 2020 when he was putting up great numbers on a week-to-week basis. Adam Thielen, a player I don't love in the long-term output or the long-term perspective of this fantasy season, but his output here in week 2 is something I expect to be very, very strong. For the second straight week, I love the matchup. We talked about it with Justin Jefferson. If Kirk Cousins can get the pass protection he needs, both of these players should have very good games. Additionally, if Thielen does some work out of the slot, he should be able to get open and find separation in the middle of the field, and that's something I think the Titans didn't do a good enough job of last week and should go very well in the Vikings' favor here this time around. Terry McLaurin on Thursday Night Football against the Giants, not something I'm overly excited about. Terry would typically be a wide receiver 1 for me here, but you're playing James Bradberry, who's been one of the best corners in the league over the past season, and you're playing on a short week with a new quarterback as the starter under center. Fitzmagic had a hip injury. Taylor Heineke comes in. He's probably going to be the starter here for week 2. Again, you only give him a few days to prepare. I expect this to be a low-scoring game, sloppy, lots of turnovers, and the ceiling for McLaurin, I think, is a significant notch lower than it would be on a normal basis here. Mike Evans for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the number 17 spot against the Atlanta Falcons. Again, he'd be higher if there wasn't so many other targets to throw the ball to. Maybe Mike gets a more involved role here after being the quietest name out there in week 1. But I still think, as great of a player as Mike Evans is, 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons, very impressive. I still think that Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin's play style complement Tom Brady's offensive attack philosophy better than Evans does. Evans is a goal line threat. He is a red zone threat. Tom wants to throw Mike the ball when he's going to score a touchdown. Similar to the same way he sees Rob Gronkowski, except Rob Gronkowski runs more middle of the field crossing routes in tight end style plays than even a Mike Evans does, which ultimately raises his value. Brown and Chris Godwin do dirty work. They're able to get open and separate downfield. We saw AB do that last week at a very good level. I just think it's going to be tough for Mike to see even the number 2 role or even to hold down the second highest target share in this offense. I think at best, Mike Evans is the 3rd most targeted player on this Bucs roster this season. And I think that Antonio Brown might notch himself into that number 2 territory. Now, this week in particular, I love the secondary matchup. I think there's a great chance Mike Evans scores a touchdown. And if that's the case, he's going to be great. He's going to get his numbers. He's going to meet his marks. But just assessing that for the long-term value, I'll give you a little sneak peek of insight into a potential video topic next week. In my sell high wide receivers video, if Mike Evans produces at a good clip this week, he'll be on that list. As soon as I get a productive game out of Mike Evans, I am looking to sell him because, again, I don't believe in that week-over-week target share total because of how many other names are there. That's just something that's a legitimate concern of mine. Cooper Kupp at number 18 against Indianapolis. After seeing what Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf did last week, I wanted to put him higher on the list here, but I'm still confident in that Colts back end. And I think that Cooper Kupp, in terms of straight line speed and being an elite deep threat, is a notch below those 2 players. So I chalked that up a little bit more to just the superlative of Metcalf and Lockett's elite ability to separate downfield. Kupp is no joke of a player. He's a great route runner, great slot receiver. But I think that his ability to do those particular 2 skills is a little bit lesser than that of Metcalf and Lockett, who produced against this Colts defense last week. I do have Kupp as the higher of the 2 offensive weapons for the Rams passing game over Robert Woods, obviously, because I think that he still does have that route running trait where he's going to be able to find himself open in other spots and find those PPR numbers and those reception totals. But I think the ceiling is lower this week than it was against the Bears in week 1. And we should expect some mild regression from that performance. Chase Claypool at number 19 against the Las Vegas Raiders this week. This is a situation I love. Chase had a really tough game week 1. It was one of the harder cornerback matchups in the league. Tre'Davious White was playing him almost every snap. And that is something that is very, very concerning for a wide receiver to see. Chase's only big plays came off of mossing Tre'Davious White or a wide receiver run play where he netted 25 yards. So in a matchup against the Raiders, which I think is a much more favorable opposition and a much more favorable matchup, Chase should see his ceiling and both his floor raised significantly here this week, and he should get back on track to being that Mapletron-esque player that he was nicknamed. I don't personally like that nickname, but I thought I'd just toss it out there for the heck of it. Diontae Johnson right behind him, his teammate at number 20. The floor is better for Diontae Johnson, but again, going back to that ceiling value of Chase Claypool, that's the difference maker here. He's the player that has the wingspan, the frame, the body type to be a touchdown magnet. Diontae is going to be a target magnet. He's going to be the guy that sees the highest volume of passes headed his way, but I think Chase will beat him out in the total touchdown production category. Again, that's the minor difference that separates those 2 players. Julio Jones got called out by Mike Vrabel post-game for doing some dumb stuff in the Week 1 loss to the Cardinals. He had drop issues. The ball came his way a lot of times, but it wasn't connecting. Him and Tannehill have got to get on the same page. Against the Seahawks, we'll see what happens here this week. I like A.J. Brown the best of any of the Titans' offensive players in fantasy this week. It's a tough situation. I think that Julio has great upside. I loved him last week, but the very disappointing numbers were certainly something to take into consideration here. I don't think that Tannehill will be under as much pressure as he was, so hopefully that'll open up the opportunity for more of a deep passing game. But still, Julio sees a little bit of a drop-off in his ranking this week. DJ Moore against the New Orleans Saints. Now I'm considering moving him higher within the next couple of days after hearing the Marshawn Lattimore injury news. That's very significant. DJ Moore now has an opened up opportunity for more potential wins on deep routes, which could increase his ceiling. And for a player who doesn't score many touchdowns, that could help him find the end zone if he's able to break away on a deep catch. At the end of the day, though, I don't feel very strongly about his ceiling or his floor. And this is a player that I think we are just hoping makes an explosive play to ultimately meet his weekly value. Jamar Chase against the Chicago Bears, last 2 names on the board here. Jamar Chase does the things well that the Rams were able to expose this Bears defense for last week. Van Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, 1 deep routes for touchdowns. Jamar Chase, week 1, first NFL start, wins a fade route for a touchdown. Correlation there. I think that if Jamar Chase is able to find himself in a situation where the Bengals set up a strong run game, run a play-action pass, and he gets himself a fade opportunity, he scored a touchdown in 7 of his last 8 starts with Joe Burrow on the field. Obviously, that dates back to college, but there's a real connection there. I think Jamar should be able to expose these corners for the Chicago defense. Jalen Johnson's really the only guy there that's a legitimate player. The other guys are very easily exposed. Jamar should have the opportunity to have multiple deep passes head his way in week 2. And then Antonio Brown at the number 24 spot makes the last name on the list. He could easily be higher. Keep him on your radar as a player that could rise up in coming weeks here, because if that target share continues to be higher than a Mike Evans, continues to be right there punch for punch with a Chris Godwin, he needs to rise up. He looked, the eye test told me, best wide receiver on the field in week 1 against the Cowboys for the Buccaneers offense. He's older now. I thought he was out of his prime heading into that game, but if I see it for back-to-back weeks here, I'm going to buy in and say Antonio Brown might just be a higher echelon receiver than I had anticipated heading into the season. Alrighty, that'll do it for my top 24 wide receivers for Week 2 fantasy football. Again, if you want to check out the rest of my Week 2 positional rankings, head down to sizzlefantasy.com, click on SFS Gold, and become a member there. That's how you'll gain access to that information and content, as well as myself or Eric setting your lineups for you every single week that you're a member of that program. So thank you all so much for watching. Remember, give this video a like, subscribe if you're new around here, turn that bell on so you're never late, never miss an episode. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.